I don't think we consider as a society whatever factors may contribute to a person committing a crime. Because I think that we've been so conditioned to think that, the commission of a crime is just that, an evil person who's committed a crime. And there are instances where that's the case. But there are also instances where, and this is more the norm and more prevalent than anything else, there are also instances where the commission of a crime is symptomatic of something larger, something greater, something bigger. And we don't want to consider that in this society, because to consider that means that we have to take on more responsibility. I was 12 years old, 6 foot tall. A little over 6 foot actually, beard and mustache, and I looked like a grown man, but I was actually a child, and I had a child's mind and a grown man's body. And in the cruel society that we live in, that doesn't necessarily bode well. So I was persecuted a lot because I was an easy mark. I looked big, but I was so frightened of older young men, older boys. So it was easy for them to intimidate me, and it was easy for them to pick on me, so I would get beat up a lot. Got kicked out of every high school that I went to. Ended up dropping out of school at 15. And by the time I got to prison, I had become this callous, cruel, sometimes vindictive person. But I was all of that because I was afraid. I was all of that because I was afraid of being persecuted, because I was afraid of going through what I had gone through as a youth, because I knew that this had the potential to be a very violent place. And if any of the rumors held true, then this was a place where rape was a great possibility for anybody. Persecution was definitely a possibility. So there were so many things that I could face as an inmate that I didn't want to face. And I didn't want anybody to know that I was afraid. So when I got to prison, I became the worst person that a human being could know. I was violent. I was quick to violence. I would persecute. I would do almost anything in prison that would garner me a reputation for being a person that you didn't want to mess with. I was not going to be persecuted. No one knew I was operating out of fear. People would say, "Man, that Bruno is crazy." I remember the first time I got out of prison, I went twice. I ran into one of my cousins, and he was like, "Man, that's all they talk about down there is you." And one of my brothers told me, "Man, I hear you down there doing this and doing that, man." They said, "You a bad actor down there." And that boasted my ego, because I wanted to be feared, because I had lived in fear for so long. Huge concrete building in the distance, and I remember seeing the fences and the rows and rows of concertina wire on top and in between several fences. And as we pulled into the gate, there were maybe 8 or 9 officers standing around waiting for us to get out. And when we got out, they instructed us to go into this building. And once we got into the building, it was a big room, big concrete room. And they made us form a circle. And we formed a circle and took off all our clothes. We got naked. And once you got out of your clothes, you threw all your clothes into the middle of the circle. And while you were standing there, some officer came over to you. And he instructed you to do what was known as the TDC dance. You had to raise your arms so that they could look under your armpits, and run your hands through your hair and run your fingers through your mouth. Then you would turn around and you would raise the one foot, the bottom. They look under the bottom of one foot, and you raise the other foot and look under the bottom of that foot. And then you would bend over and you would spread your butt cheeks. You would pull your butt cheeks apart so that he could make sure he could look inside of your anal cavity to make sure that you hadn't concealed any weapon or contraband coming into the prison. Some of the officers would kind of reverse the procedure. They had some of the guys. They would tell them to raise their arms, turn around, raise your feet. Okay, bend over, spread your cheeks, and then turn around, raise up your testicles. And I forgot that part. You had to raise up your testicles so you could make sure you hadn't taped anything under your testicles. Raise your testicles. Okay, now run your fingers through your mouth. Open your mouth, run your fingers through your mouth. And that was a game that they would play. So that after you having already had to have your fingers in your butt and your testicles in your hand, then they would have you run your fingers into your mouth. And to them, that was humorous. That was something funny. After that, we went to the shower area, and once you got to the shower area, you had to go in and take a shower, just a quick shower. And after you took the shower, then you came out, and there was a guy standing there with this bug sprayer, the old-fashioned bug sprayer they used to use to spray for roaches or whatever else in your house. And he would have you do the dance again, raise your arms, and he would spray this insecticide under your arms, and then raise your testicles, and he would spray this insecticide under your testicles and then the hair around your groin area. Then you would turn around and he would spray this insecticide in the crack of your rectum, in the crack of your butt. And this was to ensure that you didn't bring lice and crabs into the prison. The inmates still ran the prison when I got there. They were still billing tenders and turnkeys, although they were on their way out. And a billing tender and a turnkey the building tenders were the guys who ran the living area. The turnkeys were the guys, inmates, who controlled your ingress and egress. They opened the gates and closed the gates. And they would make the determination about whether or not you were supposed to go to a certain place. So the officers, essentially the only thing they had to do was sit back and relax, because the inmates ran the prison. I mean, we talk about that old adage that inmates actually did run the asylum. And because they had the backing of all of the officials, everybody from the warden on down, actually everybody from the director on down, they acted with impunity. They would do whatever they wanted to do. Attacking you and beating you viciously was the norm, because they wanted to make sure that everybody else watching understood what the consequences were for stepping out of line. I had a couple of run-ins with them because I was a knucklehead. I wasn't going to be controlled by anybody. I was in and out of segregation, lockup, and then I was in and out of solitary confinement. The difference between the two is solitary confinement is just one square cell where you don't have any contact with anybody else, and they close 2 double doors on you. And segregation, administrative segregation, is you're in a living area, but you're in a single cell, And the only contact that you have with inmates is the inmates who live around you. You can talk to them, you can socialize with them verbally, but you can't have physical contact with them. I was in both of those. I remember once when my father and mother came to see me, I was at the Cofield unit. And my mother and dad came to see me, and I had gotten into a fight a couple of days prior to them coming to see me. So I was in isolation. And when you're in isolation and you go to visitation, there's a cage that they have for you to sit in because you're isolated from inmate population. So, and they don't want you to have contact with anybody else. So they put you in this cage that's in the visitation area. And they put you in the cage, they lock the door, and you back up to a little slot, stick your arms through, and then they unlock the handcuffs. And you sit down and have your visit. And I remember when I walked in there, my father looked at me with this look of disgust. And I sat down, and he said, "Boy, you got to be the biggest damn fool in the world." So I looked at him, I said, "What? I just sat down, you man already attacking me." So I said, "What? He said, "You got to be the biggest damn fool in the world." I said, "You in jail, in jail." And it wasn't until later that really dawned on me that, that we take people who we don't trust to be in society and we lock them in prisons because we feel that they can't function in society without harming other people. Okay, now I'm in that place. And within that place, they have the same system. And I'm in that system as well. Not only do you not trust me to function in society around people, you don't trust me to function in prison around other inmates. I was on the Darrington unit at the time that Darrington had a higher murder rate than the city that it resided in. There were murders almost every week, 2 or 3 murders almost every week. I remember having to step over the blood of a number of my friends on my way back to my living area after someone had murdered them in the hallway. I watched one friend of mine who had actually saved my life. I watched him take his last breath in the chow hall, on the chow hall floor, in the kitchen floor, where someone had stabbed him in his back while he was eating. And he died, took his last breath in front of me. The psychological impact of living on that unit, where there was riots every day, there were killings every day, there were gang-sponsored hits, there were officer-sponsored hits. It was like living in a war zone. I remember once when we had a series of killings and just riots, and it was nonstop. And I was standing at the bars waiting to go somewhere, and inmates came running down the hallway saying somebody had gotten stabbed. And I remember holding on to the bars and almost just losing it, because I was like, does this ever stop? And then if you add to that the solitude, you are incarcerated with hundreds, if not thousands, of other people. But there is never a time when you don't feel alone. There is never a time when you don't feel like you are by yourself. Because there's no one there that you can actually trust. There's no one there that you can actually confide in. Although we do find those people that we put a little trust in, we do confide in, because you need that. We search for that. But it's a lonely place, because when the lights go out and there's no sound and there's nobody else stirring, you are forced to spend time with the one person that you fear the most, and that's yourself. Because we fear introspection. As men, we fear introspection. We don't want to look inside of ourselves and see the things that reside there, the things that we really are. And I say me, and I can speak for me, because I didn't want to. Well, I never wanted to know who I was. So it took a toll. I was already emotionally scarred by the time I got to prison, and by the time I left prison, I was an emotional wreck. I didn't really realize it, because one of the things that we don't do as men, and especially black men in a black community, we don't talk about mental illness. We don't talk about having mental problems. That's taboo in black neighborhoods. We'll have people who will say, you'll see someone who is psychologically or mentally challenged, and the old folks will tell you that, well, that boy ain't right. Something wrong with that boy. That boy ain't right. But we don't speak about mental illness. We don't speak about mental health. So I had no idea that prison, or that my life had rendered me almost catatonic when it came to my mental state. I was a mental mess. So when I got out for the second time, and second and last time, in 2010, March of 2010, I moved in with my parents for the first 6 months, because I didn't have, I didn't want to have to go to a halfway house. I would have, and I could have, but my family was supportive of me. So when I got out, they told me that I could live at their home for whatever amount of time I needed. And for the first 6 months I was there, and then I started getting fidgety. I really wanted to have some solitude, something that I had craved for all those years. I actually wanted to have some solitude, my own space. And my parents owned a little trailer home on some property that we own not far from my folks' house. And they said that I could live there if I wanted to. I couldn't wait to get into that trailer. It was sitting on 7 acres of property at the very back of the 7 acres, well, about middleways of the 7 acres. But it was off of the main road. There was a gate, a big swinging gate at the front that I could lock when I got in, and no one else could come in behind me. So that was appealing to me. And what it provided me with was an opportunity to fool myself. It provided me with the opportunity to convince myself that I had not been and was not going to be institutionalized. And that's one of the things that almost every man that goes to prison fears. He fears being institutionalized, being unable to perform or function outside of an institutional setting. And I didn't want to be institutionalized. And I convinced myself that I had stayed above the fray while I was in prison, that I had removed myself. I had been so removed from the fray that the institutionalization hadn't touched me. In order to bolster that, I was able to move back into the trailer home and seclude myself. I didn't have to deal with people. If you came to visit me, the gate was locked. Because when I came in, I locked the gate behind me. If you wanted to come in to visit with me, you would have to call me on the telephone. And if you called me on the telephone, and I was looking at you at the gate, and I didn't want to spend time with you, I didn't want to visit with you, I didn't answer the phone. You couldn't get in unless you got out of your car and walked. And that was a pretty good walk for most people. So, very few people got out of their vehicle and walked. So it was easy for me to seclude myself. And in that seclusion, I convinced myself that I was okay. Prison hadn't touched me. Prison hadn't ruined me like it had ruined so many other people that I had seen. And I ended up just getting the dog, and it was me and my dog, Chico. And I kept Chico back there with me in the same seclusion, in the same solitude. And I think as a result, Chico is as dysfunctional now as I am, because Chico doesn't do people well at all. He doesn't do dogs well, he doesn't do people well. I go into prisons now as a volunteer, and I ask guys 3 questions when I go in. When we talk about mental health, I ask them, why do you eat food? And I want the simple answer. And the simple answer is because I'm hungry. And I ask them, why do you drink water? And the simple answer is because I'm thirsty. And then I ask them, why do you commit crimes? And no one has been able to answer that question yet. And if a person is dealing with mental illness, and we don't talk about mental illness in our neighborhoods, we don't talk about mental illness in the Black community, we don't talk about mental illness as men. So if a person is dealing with mental illness or some type of mental defect, a result of molestation, or a result of abuse in the home, or a result of anything that any of those extrapolating circumstances, and any of those circumstances outside, and those outside influences, we never find that out. And a person goes to prison and spends years and years in prison. I spent almost 30 years in prison. Spends years and years in prison and gets out and is never diagnosed. Every year there are over 600,000 men and women released from prisons. Over half of them are undiagnosed, who have mental illnesses. We have the highest recidivism rate in the world. 1 in 4 people released from prison will go back to prison within the first year. That's crazy. And we're not looking into this to figure out why this is. So we lock people up. And we lock people up who may, if diagnosed, may be able to be treated and have whatever condition they're suffering from rectified and never commit another crime. We have young men in adult prisons who are 13, 14, 15 years old, who have life without parole because of some heinous crime that they've committed. And we are willing to say that you are solely responsible for this because you were able to make that decision at 13, 14, 15 years old. Most therapists would tell you that you aren't, as an adult, you aren't able to make a rational decision, a responsible decision, until you're 20 years old. So we as a society have gotten comfortable with the fact that we can lock these young men up at 13 or 14, 15, 16, maybe even 17 years old. We can lock them up for the rest of their life and say, we're comfortable with the fact that you'll never be on the streets again, because within 13, 14 years, you have become incorrigible. There's nothing else we can do for you. So for the rest of your life, you're going to be in prison. You don't even know who you are until you're 20. You don't start getting a sense of self until you're 20 years old. So how are we doing this? And how are we doing this with a clear conscience? And that's one of the reasons that we're doing, that I'm doing what I'm doing now, because we need to bring awareness to this. Somebody needs to know, somebody needs to ask the questions. And people need to ask themselves, am I okay with this?